I'm going to do a quick close reading on yellow wallpaper. I'll just hit a few points to get you started on delving into the story in case this is the one that you want to do an analysis on. So yellow wallpaper, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. There's been multiple readings and interpretations of the story. Now, to understand best what the story is about, you have to look closely at it, and I would suggest really doing it line by line like we did with The Hidden Teacher and with Ozymandias. You need to look at what phrases stand out, where there might be patterns, where there might be repetitions, contradictions, ironies, and look at the relationships between the people. And since it's called yellow wallpaper, of course, we would need to look at the relationships there. So we're going to touch on a few of those things. The first question then is what stands out? In the first page, what I see first off is this question here. And the reason why this stands out to me is because it's twice. Here she said, the writing is, "You see, he does not believe I am sick." She's talking about her husband. "And what can one do?" Seems innocuous enough, except here. "Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do?" This question appears twice, very quickly at the very beginning of the story, and I think it sets the tone for the story. I think it's actually asking the question which the narrator answers throughout the story. What is one to do? Well, she tells us she's going to do two things. First, she's going to secretly and slyly write about the situation to us, her reader. The second thing that she does is that she's going to find a woman in the wallpaper and she's going to help that woman escape. So in the question, what is one to do, where it comes across as not having agency or power, the narrator answers that and tells us she's going to gain power by escaping the entrapment and the imprisonment that, from a feminist point of view, you would say is imposed on her through a patriarchal society. And she is going to use writing as an outlet in order to have power. Now let's look at her relationship with John. Why can't she face the reality of her conflict with her husband? Well, partly because John defines and decides how she's going to deal with her condition. He's her husband, and therefore just in that role, he has power to determine her role, and he is her physician, and he has the power to define her disease and treat her disease. Here are some lines from the story that accentuate that. "If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there's really nothing wrong with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do?" See that line again? "So I take phosphates or phosphites, or whatever it is, and tonics and journeys in air and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again." So she does, even though she loves her husband and says how loving he is to her, she has a self-doubting conviction that she knows more than her husband does. She says that he doesn't believe that she's sick. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? She doesn't have any power over her husband at all. Irony is another thing that we can look at in this story. And irony is another way of seeing a contradiction. When stories start showing themselves with contradictions, and you can look into those and see what's really going on. So an irony is a clash between somebody's perception of a situation, what that meaning is, and the actual meaning of that situation. So here are just a few examples of how it can be seen in the story. Here's a line. "I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it's due to my nervous condition." So here she's perceiving her situation to be of unreasonable anger, but she's saying it in a very logical way. She doesn't have unreasonable anger at all. The unreasonableness and the anger might be from her subconscious understanding that's within her. Here's another sentence. "Dear John, he loves me very dearly and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day." Well, the dramatic irony here is that John's actions completely contradict her perception of him as loving. John is not earnest or reasonable with her, but simply tells her what to do without listening to what she wants to have done. So irony is at the heart of the story's essential conflict. Its real meanings are buried beneath the surface of apparent meaning. Here's some other examples, and you could find more in the story. John is not able to see the apparent goal of his system of treatment to make her well, which contradicts the actual meaning of what he's trying to do. He is making her sicker in everything that he does, not making her better. The wife is not able to see the nature of her situation in her own superior understanding of it. And there's an apparent meaning of the wallpaper to her disordered imagination. She sees somebody imprisoned in it, and that conflicts with the real meaning that she is the imprisoned woman. So now we're going to look at the relationship between the narrator and the wallpaper. Since it's called the yellow wallpaper, I think it's paramount that we look at the evolution of the wallpaper's role in the story. So the first thing that happens when she first comes in contact with the wallpaper, she's repulsed by it. She says she's shut up in a summer home and the bedroom and doesn't like it. She calls it a smoldering, unclean yellow. She says its way of breaking into sprawling, flamboyant patterns, and the wallpaper has outrageous angles and unheard of contradictions. The next time she informs us of the wallpaper, she attributes intention to it. She says the paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. The viciousness, perhaps, revealed in a pattern which lolls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes that stare at you upside down. She's personifying it and giving it human-like qualities at this point. She also starts to notice a sub-pattern of a figure that's skulking behind the front design. In our third evolution of the wallpaper, she starts to develop an obsession. She talks about having a supreme imagination as a child where she could get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. So she's now doing the same thing with the wallpaper. She has this habit of story making. She fancies people walking. She believes the woman trapped in the wallpaper gets out because she can see it creeping in the lanes, the long road, and the garden. Through every one of my windows, she says. Then she eventually develops an appreciation for the wallpaper, and this comes about very quickly. She says, I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper. Then in the next sentence, perhaps because of the wallpaper. So the fondness of the room is because of the fondness of the wallpaper. Then she starts to make discoveries. She says the outside pattern is holding a prisoner. Behind the outside pattern, dim shapes get clearer every day. The shapes, or shape, is a woman stooping down and creeping about behind the pattern. This clarity that she's getting of this woman behind the wallpaper is a clarity of her subconscious. It seems that her consciousness and her subconsciousness are starting to merge at this point. And that's also, as her clarity of her situation comes to her, she also becomes more insane. She sees the imprisonment at this point. The moonlight makes the pattern into bars. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you, and it's like a bad dream. Then she starts to identify the woman. The woman who creeps behind the wallpaper is described in increasing detail. The focus becomes on the woman's possible escape. And at one point, even in this section, the narrator uses the phrase, I creep. She's saying, this woman creeps and creeps and creeps, and then she says, I creep. Very quickly, it's just like a Freudian slip. Then she becomes both herself and the creeping woman, a split perception. Again, the merging of her subconscious and consciousness. So then she decides to free the woman by tearing off the wallpaper. Coming closer to the end, she becomes the outsider. She says, Jane can't keep me in. That's a mysterious reference. Jane, we don't know who Jane is. We're not sure if Charlotte Gilman Perkins maybe made an error thinking to write Jenny, who is the sister. Or is Jane maybe finally the name of the narrator who we haven't known up until this time? Or Jane could be a reference to Mad Woman in the Attic and Jane Eyre. She says, I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that's hard. It's so pleasant to be out in this great room and creep around as I please. So she has unleashed the woman that was trapped in the wallpaper which subconsciously was herself. She's creeping on the floor to finally have her final escape, which is when John falls unconscious across her path. But he no longer blocks her way because she can calmly and repeatedly crawl over him, saying, "I've got out at last," said I, "in spite of you." And there's Jane again. "And I've pulled off most of the wallpaper so you can't put me back." And then she has a reflection and wonders, why should that man have fainted? But he did. And right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. So I'm also going to post some questions that you can consider when you're looking at this story to help you delve deeper into it.